What if I told you that the first 40 years of your life weren't really yours? That everything you've built, your job, your relationships, even your personality, might just be a mask carefully crafted to please others? What if all your accomplishments were not signs of freedom, but layers of conditioning? We grow up believing that life is about collecting titles, climbing ladders, building families, and becoming someone. And when we succeed at all that, society applauds. But then, why does it still feel empty? Why is there a quiet ache even in moments that are supposed to feel victorious? Carl Jung, one of the greatest minds in modern psychology, once said, "Life really begins at 40. Until then, you are just doing research." At first, that sounds absurd because by 40, most people are exhausted, not just physically, but existentially. They've followed the rules, checked the boxes, and met the expectations. Yet, something still feels off, like they've been living someone else's life. And maybe, just maybe, they have. You see, Jung believed that much of what we call a life before 40 is really a rehearsal, a long, complicated experiment in trying to be what the world wants us to be. We shape our personalities around what's rewarded, we suppress what's inconvenient, we become adaptable, but at a cost. We lose touch with who we truly are. Have you ever had the unsettling thought that you don't fully recognize the person you've become? That beneath the layers of responsibility and routine, there's a self you haven't met yet? If so, you're not alone. In fact, you might be on the verge of something extraordinary. Because what most people call a midlife crisis, Jung saw it as an invitation. Not a breakdown, but a breakthrough. Not an ending, but the beginning of something real. And in this video, we're going to uncover why. We live in a society that is obsessed with beginnings but terrified of transitions. We idolize youth, chase ambition, celebrate fresh starts. But when it comes to aging, especially crossing that invisible threshold into midlife, we flinch. We don't talk about it with reverence, we talk about it with dread. And so we've labeled it the midlife crisis, a term loaded with sarcasm, pity, and subtle shame. The man who suddenly buys a sports car, leaves his job, or grows his hair long. The woman who questions her marriage, changes careers, or takes up meditation. These are treated as cliches, as if these people have lost their minds. But what if they're not breaking down? What if they're waking up? Carl Jung believed exactly that. He rejected the cultural narrative that midlife is the beginning of decline. In fact, he argued the opposite. Life really begins at 40. Until then, you are just doing research. At first, that idea sounds almost offensive, especially to those who've spent the first 40 years working hard, building families, accumulating success. But Jung wasn't dismissing your accomplishments. He was pointing out something deeper, that much of our early life is spent becoming who the world wants us to be. It starts in childhood. We are molded by parents, teachers, media, and religion. We learn quickly what earns approval and what earns rejection. So we shape ourselves accordingly. We become who we need to be in order to survive, to succeed, to belong. And Jung called that adaptation the persona, the mask we wear in public, the version of ourselves that is polished, likable, and productive. It's not inherently bad. In fact, it's necessary. Without it, we couldn't function in society. But here's the problem. The longer we wear the mask, the easier it is to forget that it's not our face. By the time we reach midlife, we may have a resume, a reputation, a routine. But do we have a self? That's the question that begins to haunt us. Not because something is wrong, but because something inside is trying to break through. And that's the moment society labels a crisis. But what if it's not a crisis? What if it's a turning point? A sacred threshold between who you've been told to be and who you truly are. Jung believed that this moment, the unraveling of the persona, is the start of the most important journey in a human's life. Not the climb up the mountain of success, but the descent inward, into the soul. He called it individuation, a process of integrating everything you've denied, repressed, or forgotten about yourself. It's not easy. It doesn't happen overnight, but it's real, and it's necessary. Because if you don't start asking those deeper questions, what matters? Who am I? What do I want? You risk living the rest of your life asleep, performing roles that no longer fit, chasing goals that no longer mean anything. Midlife asks us to pause, not because life is ending, but because something more authentic is trying to begin. And for the first time, you're invited to stop building and start becoming, to stop performing and start feeling, to stop pleasing and start listening. But the world doesn't reward that. It fears it, because awakened people can't be manipulated. They don't buy into the same old lies. They don't settle. So yes, culture calls it a midlife crisis. But Jung saw it for what it truly is, an initiation, a sacred dismantling, not into chaos, but into clarity. So if you're feeling lost, uncertain, restless, maybe you're not broken. Maybe you're just finally ready to meet yourself. And that is not a crisis. It's the beginning of your real life. From the moment we're born, the world begins to shape us. Before we even speak our first words, we're absorbing the silent rules of what it means to be good, to be normal, to be enough. Parents reward obedience. Teachers praise conformity. We learn that certain emotions, anger, sadness, even too much joy, make people uncomfortable. So we begin to edit ourselves. Little by little, we become performers in a script we didn't write. We act politely when we feel rage. We smile when we're breaking. We try to be what others need, not because we're fake, but because we've been trained to believe that's the only way to be loved. Carl Jung called this adaptation the persona, not in a cynical way, but as a survival tool. The persona is the face we show the world, curated, polished, acceptable. It helps us navigate society. It gives us a role to play. But the tragedy, Jung warned, is when the role replaces the reality, when the mask becomes fused to the skin, when we no longer know where the performance ends and the person begins. For most of us, the first 30 or 40 years of life are spent perfecting that persona. We build careers that match what success should look like. We choose partners based on what love should feel like. We set goals based on what achievement should mean. But somewhere along the way, a quiet voice begins to whisper, "This isn't me. I don't recognize the person I've become. I'm living someone else's dream, but not mine." At first, we silence that voice. We tell ourselves we're just ungrateful, or tired, or overthinking. But the voice doesn't go away, because it's not complaining. It's remembering. It remembers the parts of you that were buried to survive, the desires you shut down because they didn't fit the mold, the questions you stopped asking because the answers were too disruptive. And by midlife, that voice gets louder, not because you're weak, but because your false self is cracking. The persona is no longer enough. You've worn it so long it's suffocating you. Jung wrote, "The greatest tragedy is to live a life that is not your own." And that's exactly what so many people do. Not because they're bad, not because they're broken, but because they were never taught that it's possible to live any other way. You were taught to build, to accumulate, to please, to adapt, but you were never taught how to listen, how to trust your intuition, how to say, no, this path isn't mine. And so we find ourselves at 35, 40, 45, with a life full of accomplishments, but a heart full of questions. You may have a title, a home, a family, but do you have peace? Do you have authenticity? Do you even know what you want anymore? This is not failure. This is not dysfunction. This is the beginning of consciousness, because the first half of life is about survival, but the second half can be about truth. And the bridge between the two is honesty. It starts by admitting that maybe, just maybe, the life you've built doesn't reflect who you really are. And that terrifying realization, that's where freedom begins. Not in tearing everything down, but in daring to look deeper, to ask, who am I beneath the mask? What parts of myself have I exiled? And what would it mean to come home to myself? This is the crossroads Jung spoke of, where the persona begins to dissolve, and something ancient, something real, begins to stir beneath the surface. It is not a breakdown. It is a calling. There comes a moment in every life when the questions become too loud to ignore. They may not arrive in a dramatic thunderclap. Sometimes they whisper in the quiet of a sleepless night. Sometimes they surface as a strange numbness, a restlessness that no achievement can soothe. And they always ask the same thing. Is this really my life? Is this what I was meant for? What do I actually want? At first, we try to silence these questions. We tell ourselves it's just stress. We distract ourselves with work, entertainment, and responsibilities. We try to return to the comforting rhythm of routine. But the questions don't leave. They linger, because they are not signs of crisis. They are signs of awakening. Carl Jung saw midlife not as a psychological collapse, but as a spiritual opening. He said that what society often calls a breakdown is actually a breakthrough. Midlife is not the end. It is the beginning of the true self. And that beginning is rarely neat. It doesn't come with clarity or certainty. It often starts with confusion, with emotional turbulence, with grief. Grief for the life you thought you wanted. Grief for the parts of yourself you abandoned to become who others needed you to be. It can feel terrifying to look at the life you've built and wonder if it belongs to you at all. To admit that the dream you've chased no longer excites you. To feel disconnected from everything you've worked for. But that discomfort is holy. It is the moment your soul stops tolerating the lie. The moment your inner self begins to rebel against the persona, not because you failed, but because you've outgrown the mask. This is the turning point. You can keep resisting, keep clinging to what's familiar, but the cost is steep. Emotional numbness, existential fatigue, a quiet life of quiet desperation. Or you can listen. You can begin to lean into the discomfort, not as a problem to fix, but as a compass pointing towards something real. Because underneath the confusion, there is clarity waiting. Underneath the fear, there is power. And underneath the ache, there is truth. It is the truth that you were never meant to live someone else's script. That success without meaning is hollow. That productivity without purpose is soul-crushing. That you are not here to perform. You are here to become. The world might call it a midlife crisis. But Jung knew better. He understood that these questions, the ones that won't let you sleep, are the soul's way of knocking. Not to destroy, but to invite. not to dismantle, but to rebuild this time from the inside out. You see, the crisis isn't about your age. It's about your alignment, the space between who you are and who you've pretended to be. And the wider that gap grows, the more unbearable life becomes, until eventually something has to give, either the mask or you. But here's the miracle. When you choose to let the mask fall, when you dare to answer the questions, you begin the most authentic chapter of your life. Not the second half. The real half. The half where you stop chasing and start listening. The half where your values change not because you've given up, but because you've woken up. The half where your choices are no longer dictated by fear, but by truth. So if you feel like your life is unraveling, maybe it's not a breakdown. Maybe it's the beginning of everything that matters. Maybe, just maybe, you're not falling apart. You're finally falling into place. Once the mask begins to slip, once the life you've built no longer satisfies your soul, something deeper begins to stir. Not panic, not dysfunction, but a call. A call to return to the self you've forgotten. Not the version others applauded. Not the image you carefully curated, but the real, raw, whole you. Carl Jung called this sacred process individuation. It is the journey of integrating who you truly are with the parts of yourself you've denied, ignored, or rejected. It is not about becoming someone new. It is about remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. At the center of this journey lies one unavoidable truth. You cannot become whole by embracing only the light. You must also face the shadow. The shadow in Jung's work is the dark side of your personality, the traits, desires, memories, and wounds you've hidden because they made you feel unlovable or unsafe. It's the rage you suppress, the grief you avoid, the dreams you abandoned, the parts of you that once spoke too loudly or shone too brightly and were told to shrink. And here's the paradox. Everything you've been avoiding is exactly what holds the key to your liberation. Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." The shadow doesn't disappear when you ignore it. It governs your choices from behind the scenes. It sabotages your relationships, fuels your anxiety, and colors your worldview. And because it stays hidden, you never realize that the thing hurting you is you. Individuation is the slow, courageous act of turning inward. It requires honesty, the kind that burns. It requires humility to admit that you've been living half a life. And it requires radical compassion for the self you've exiled. This isn't about self-improvement. This isn't about fixing yourself. This is about becoming whole, because you are not just your ambition. You are also your doubts. You are not just your kindness. You are also your anger. You are not just your dreams. You are also your wounds. And the more you try to split yourself into good and bad, acceptable and unacceptable, the more fragmented you become, the more exhausted, the more disconnected. But when you begin to integrate the shadow, to listen to what your fear is really trying to protect, to understand the pain behind your defensiveness, to give space to the child within who was never truly seen, something changes. You soften. You stop reacting and start reflecting. You stop blaming and start owning. You begin to see that your shadow is not your enemy. It is your teacher. It holds your lost energy, your creativity, your aliveness, your depth. And when you bring light to the shadow, you reclaim all of that. You no longer live at the mercy of your unconscious. You begin to choose with clarity, to love with integrity, to live with wholeness. This is individuation. It is not linear, it is not glamorous, but it is sacred. It is the art of becoming fully human, of integrating your contradictions, of embodying the truth that you are complex, paradoxical, unfinished, and beautiful because of it. And in a world obsessed with perfection, wholeness becomes a quiet rebellion. Because when you accept every part of yourself, no one can control you. No one can shame you into silence. No one can sell you an identity you don't need. You become free not because you've escaped your shadow, but because you've befriended it. So if you find yourself standing at the edge of discomfort, confusion, and change, know this: you are not falling apart. You are falling into yourself. And that, above all, is where life truly begins. There's a reason so many people begin to see life differently in their 42nd and 52nd. It's not just nostalgia or the weight of responsibility. It's biology. It's psychology. It's awakening. Midlife marks a profound neurological and emotional shift. Studies in neuroscience show that as we age, we become less reactive and more reflective. The emotional centers of the brain, particularly the amygdala, become less dominant. Meanwhile, the prefrontal cortex, responsible for decision-making, empathy, and emotional regulation, becomes more active and integrated. In simple terms, we become wiser. Not because we know more facts, but because we see more clearly. This is the real gift of midlife. Not youth, not energy, but clarity. We begin to care less about being right and more about being real. Less about impressing others and more about expressing ourselves authentically. The ego, once loud and hungry, starts to quiet down. And in that silence, the soul begins to speak. At this stage, people often report a shift in priorities. What once seemed urgent status, possessions, recognition now feels hollow. And what once seemed secondary peace, meaning presence, suddenly feels essential. This is not a weakness. This is evolution. You are not losing your edge. You are gaining your essence. Carl Jung understood this better than anyone. He believed that in the first half of life, our task is to build the persona, the social self, the mask that allows us to function in the world. But in the second half, our task is different. It is to let go of that mask and begin the process of individuation to become whole, not just successful. Jung once wrote, "Wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration of the contraries." And midlife is where this integration begins. It's where we stop chasing perfection and begin embracing complexity, where we stop editing ourselves and begin reclaiming what was exiled. It's where the question changes from "how do I win" to "how do I live well?" Because by now, you've seen enough to know that external success doesn't equal internal peace. You've checked the boxes, hit the milestones, met the expectations, but if you're still feeling restless, empty, or lost, that's not failure. That's the invitation. Midlife becomes the moment when you stop living on autopilot. You begin to wake up not just to the world, but to yourself. You realize that life is no longer about addition, but subtraction. Not about having more, but becoming less divided. The focus shifts from achievement to alignment, from doing to being. You begin to ask, what parts of myself have I ignored? What dreams have I buried? What am I still pretending not to know? These aren't light questions. They shake the ground beneath your feet, but they also make room for something new to grow, something rooted, something real. Relationships begin to change too. You crave depth over drama. You become more selective, not out of bitterness, but because your time and energy are sacred now. You're no longer willing to abandon yourself to fit into spaces that don't feel right. This is not isolation. This is integrity. You begin to notice the richness in small things, quiet mornings, honest conversations, unforced laughter. You realize that the joy you were chasing out there was inside you all along. In midlife, we begin to live more fully in the present, not out of discipline, but because we finally understand how precious an island the past taught us, the future invites us. But it is now that holds the power to transform us. So no, midlife is not a tragedy. It is not a fading of the light. It is the fire finally burning clean. It's not too late. It never was. This is the moment you've been waiting for. Not the beginning of the end, but the beginning of who you really are. What if everything you feared about midlife was never the truth, only the narrative you were sold? What if this isn't your ending? What if it's your invitation? Not to reinvent yourself, but to remember yourself. Not to chase youth, but to claim wholeness. Not to run away from the years behind you, but to finally run toward the life that's been waiting. Because real life doesn't begin when you reach a certain milestone. It doesn't begin when the world says you're successful. It begins when the performance ends. The masks you've worn, you can lay them down now. The roles you've played, you're allowed to rewrite them. The script you've followed, written by family, culture, fear, you're free to step off that stage. Carl Jung didn't believe in passive aging. He believed in conscious transformation. He saw midlife not as a moment of decay, but as the moment the soul begins to breathe. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. This is your privilege now. To stop living by habit, to stop numbing your instincts, to stop editing your soul for the comfort of others. You don't need to prove anything anymore. You've already done the performance. Now it's time to do the becoming. But that doesn't happen by accident. You must choose it. You must meet yourself, your real self. Not the self shaped by obligation, but the one shaped by truth. Yes, it's uncomfortable. Yes, it may mean letting go of identities you've clung to for decades. But what's waiting on the other side is yours. Not borrowed, not performed. Yours. Midlife is the mirror. And when you dare to look into it without flinching, you don't just see wrinkles. You see wisdom. You see survival. You see the parts of you that never stopped whispering, even when no one was listening. And finally, you are listening. This is not a crisis. This is your call to awaken, to stop performing, to start living. It won't always be easy. Growth never island. But it will be honest, and it will be yours. So here's the question only you can answer. Are you ready? Are you ready to turn down the volume of expectation and turn up the volume of your intuition? Are you ready to leave behind the life that looked good for the one that feels real? Because that life is possible, and it begins the moment you stop asking, who do they want me to be? And start asking, who am I really? This is your chance, not to escape aging, but to embody it. Not to resist change, but to become the author of it. You don't need permission. You don't need to wait for some perfect moment. This is it. Right now. Midlife is not the sunset of your story. It is the dawn, if you dare to meet the person you truly are. So go meet them. Not tomorrow. Not someday. Now. Because the real life, the deep life, the authentic life, begins the moment you do. If this message spoke to something deep inside you, if it reminded you of who you are beneath the noise, then don't let the conversation end here. Hit the like button to let us know this resonated with you. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next awakening. We're building a space for seekers, for thinkers, for those who dare to ask the deeper questions. And we want you to be part of it. In the comments, share with us. What part of this journey hit you the hardest? Which insight from Jung or from your own experience spoke truth to your story? Your words might awaken someone else. Let's grow, reflect, and wake up together. Because real life begins when you stop pretending.